12 ancient discoveries that prove someone erased our real history. There are discoveries that do not simply add a new detail to history. They do something more dangerous. They disturb the shape of the story itself. A stone circle appears in Turkey thousands of years before civilization was supposed to build temples. A machine rises from the bottom of the sea with gears so precise that nothing like it appears again for more than 1,000 years. A hidden void is detected inside the most studied monument on Earth, not by archaeologists with chisels, but by cosmic particles passing through stone. Entire cities appear beneath the Amazon canopy after centuries of being dismissed as impossible. Underground worlds, sealed chambers, artificial caves, maps with lost source material, and artifacts that seem to arrive from a forgotten chapter of human intelligence. Individually, each discovery can be explained. That is what institutions do. They classify. They date. They contain the anomaly inside a familiar category. Temple, tomb, quarry, ritual object, ceremonial center, accident, coincidence, later contamination, lost documentation. But when the discoveries are placed side by side, when they are no longer treated as isolated puzzles, but as data points in a larger pattern, something begins to appear. Not a simple conspiracy. Not a single hidden organization standing behind every ancient ruin. Something older and harder to name. A pattern of knowledge appearing, disappearing, and then being rediscovered as if for the first time. This is the part of history that most people never see. Not because the evidence is always hidden. Often it is sitting in museums, published in journals, fenced behind ticket booths, or listed on UNESCO pages. The hiding happens somewhere else. It happens in the explanation. It happens when the discovery is reduced to a label before anyone has had time to feel the size of the question it raises. Because the question is not simply, what did ancient people build? The question is, what did they know? Who taught them? Why did some forms of knowledge vanish? And why do the surviving pieces so often look like the broken edges of a much larger book? These are 12 ancient discoveries that suggest someone or something erased parts of our real history. Not always with fire, not always with war, sometimes with silence, sometimes with neglect, sometimes by burying the evidence so completely that thousands of years had to pass before the ground, the jungle, the sea, or the stone gave it back. And the first discovery begins in a place where the official story of civilization should not have been able to stand. 12. Göbekli Tepe, the temple before civilization. Before the pyramids, before Stonehenge, before writing, before the wheel, before kings and armies and cities, there was a hill in southeastern Anatolia where hunter-gatherers carved limestone pillars into human-like forms, dragged them into circular enclosures, covered them with animals, symbols, arms, hands, belts, foxes, vultures, snakes, boars, and scorpions, and then deliberately buried the whole thing beneath tons of earth. The place is called Göbekli Tepe. For most of the 20th century, the story was simple. Agriculture came first, permanent settlement came after agriculture, then came social complexity, then came temples, then came priesthoods, then came civilization. That was the ladder. That was the direction. First food surplus, then religion large enough to move stone. Göbekli Tepe broke the ladder. The earliest monumental structures at the site date to roughly 9,600 to 8,200 BCE in the pre-pottery Neolithic period, a time when the people of the region were still largely hunter-gatherers. Not farmers in the later urban sense, not citizens of a state, not subjects of a king, yet they were capable of organizing labor, carving megaliths, transporting multi-ton pillars, building monumental enclosures, and creating an iconographic world whose meaning has not survived. The pillars are not crude. They are not experimental. They do not look like the first clumsy attempt of people just learning that stone can be shaped. Some of them stand over 5 meters tall. Some weigh many tons. Many are carved in high relief with animals that seem to move across the surface as if the stone were not stone but memory. And then comes the most disturbing part. They buried it. Not destroyed. Not abandoned gradually. Buried. Deliberately. Filled in with material containing stone debris, animal bones, and refuse until the enclosures disappeared beneath the hill. Whoever built Göbekli Tepe did not simply walk away from it. They concealed it. Mainstream archaeology explains Göbekli Tepe as a ritual center built by highly organized hunter-gatherer communities, possibly connected to feasting, funerary rites, ancestor worship, or the early formation of settled society. This is not a weak explanation, it is one of the most important archaeological reinterpretations of the modern era. Ancient people were more socially and symbolically complex than earlier models allowed, but that explanation opens another question instead of closing the first one. If hunter-gatherers could organize monumental ritual architecture before agriculture, then how much of the story of civilization was built backward? How many sites were dismissed or misread because they appeared too early? How many vanished under later settlements, under farms, under rivers, under modern cities? Because archaeologists were not expecting temples before agriculture and therefore did not recognize what they were seeing, Göbekli Tepe did not just reveal a site. It revealed a blind spot. It showed that the human urge to build sacred architecture may not have been the result of civilization. It may have been one of the causes of civilization. The temple may have come before the city. The ritual may have come before the farm. The invisible idea may have pulled the visible world into shape. And if that is true, then the beginning of human history was not practical. It was not merely hunger, grain, storage, and survival. It was obsession. It was memory. It was the need to carve something into stone so it could survive the people who made it. The official story adjusted. Textbooks changed. But the deeper implication remains mostly untouched. A civilization-level project existed before civilization was supposed to exist, and someone buried it. From a buried temple in Anatolia, we move to another site in the same ancient landscape, a place that suggests Göbekli Tepe was not an isolated miracle, but part of a network. A forgotten horizon of builders whose world is only now beginning to rise from the soil. 11. Karahan Tepe. The face from the oldest forgotten network, Göbekli Tepe, was once treated as an anomaly. One impossible hill. One strange ritual center. One exception that could be placed carefully into the archaeological record without completely destroying the record around it. Then, Karahan Tepe began to speak. Located in the same region of southeastern Turkey, Karahan Tepe belongs to the wider Taş Tepeler, or pure stone hills, landscape. This is not one site. It is a network of Neolithic places spread across the region, some with T-shaped pillars, carved stone architecture, animal symbolism, and ritual spaces dating back roughly 11,000 years. The significance is difficult to exaggerate. One site can be an outlier, two sites are harder to dismiss. A network means a culture, a shared symbolic system, a landscape of people who understood stone, ritual, gathering, memory, and perhaps power in ways that do not fit the old model of simple nomadic bands waiting for agriculture to make them complex. At Karahan Tepe, archaeologists have uncovered carved pillars, chambers, stone settings, human and animal figures, and a strange quality of design that feels at once primitive and sophisticated. Some of the discoveries are almost disturbing in their intimacy. Human faces, human forms, figures that do not look like decoration, but like presences. One space in particular changes the emotional atmosphere of the site, a carved chamber with stone projections, a human head emerging from the rock, and an arrangement that gives the impression of a place designed for ritual performance, not ordinary habitation. It is not simply that the site is old. Age alone is not the mystery. The mystery is that it appears already connected to a developed symbolic world. The builders were not randomly piling stones. They were repeating forms. They were participating in a shared language. Mainstream archaeology places Karahan Tepe within the pre-pottery Neolithic, a period of transition in which humans in Upper Mesopotamia moved toward sedentism, symbolic complexity, and eventually agriculture. In this view, the site is not evidence of a lost advanced civilization, but of the underestimated sophistication of early Neolithic communities. That may be correct. But then the word underestimated becomes the doorway to a larger problem. Underestimated by whom, for how long, and what else did the same framework underestimate? For generations, the model said that people before agriculture could not build like this. Then they found Göbekli Tepe. Then they found more. The model did not predict the evidence. The evidence forced the model to move. This is how erased history often returns. Not as a complete book. Not as a temple with an inscription saying, "Everything you believed was wrong." It returns as fragments that appear too early, a pillar too old, a symbol too sophisticated, a chamber too deliberate, a network where there was supposed to be only scattered survival. Karahan Tepe suggests that what was buried at Göbekli Tepe was not one sacred place. It was an entire mental world, a world with rituals, symbols, architecture, and social coordination before the traditional birth certificate of civilization had even been written. And the most unsettling possibility is not that ancient people were visited by something outside history. It is that they were always far more complex than history allowed them to be, and that the proof was buried, ignored, or classified as impossible until the ground itself became the witness. From the stone hills of Turkey, we move forward thousands of years and into the sea, where divers searching a shipwreck brought up corroded bronze fragments that should not have existed at all. 10. The Antikythera mechanism, the computer that history forgot. In 1901, sponge divers working near the Greek island of Antikythera recovered a strange lump of corroded bronze from an ancient shipwreck. At first it looked like debris, a ruined object. A meaningless fragment from a cargo of statues, coins, amphorae, and luxury goods lost beneath the Mediterranean. Then someone noticed a gear. Not a decorative wheel, not a simple mechanical part, a gear with teeth, then more gears, then inscriptions, then dials. Then a machine began to emerge from the corrosion. The Antikythera mechanism is now widely understood as an ancient Greek astronomical calculator, constructed around the 2nd century BCE. It used an intricate system of bronze gears to model celestial cycles, including lunar phases, calendars, eclipse predictions, and possibly planetary movements. It is often called the world's oldest known analog computer. That phrase is repeated so often that its meaning has become dull. Oldest known analog computer. Say it more slowly. A geared astronomical machine was built over 2,000 years ago, lost in a shipwreck, forgotten by the world, and nothing of comparable complexity appears again in the surviving record for more than a millennium. That is not normal technological history. That is a flare in the darkness, a sudden bright intelligence appearing in the archaeological record, then vanishing. The device was not magic, it was engineering. Its surviving gears show mathematical planning, metalworking skill, astronomical knowledge, and mechanical design working together inside a portable object. Whoever made it did not merely know the sky. They knew how to translate cycles of the sky into ratios of rotating bronze. Mainstream scholarship places the mechanism within the extraordinary scientific culture of the Hellenistic world, perhaps connected to traditions of astronomy and mathematics associated with Rhodes, Hipparchus, Archimedes, or their intellectual heirs. This is reasonable. The Greek world had geometry, observational astronomy, mechanical devices, and written scientific traditions. But the mystery is not whether the Greeks could have made it. The mystery is why the tradition disappeared. Where are the workshops that made more? Where are the intermediate devices? Where are the training manuals, the broken prototypes, the cheaper versions, the later improvements? Where is the technological lineage that should connect this machine to medieval clocks many centuries later? A device this complex is rarely born alone. Machines come from ecosystems. They require artisans, patrons, mathematicians, metalworkers, users, repairs, copies, and demand. The Antikythera mechanism feels less like an isolated invention and more like the last surviving page of a technical library that was burned. And perhaps that is exactly what it is. The ancient Mediterranean was not a quiet place where knowledge moved safely from one generation to the next. Libraries burned, cities fell. Bronze was melted down, temples were stripped. Scientific traditions became politically useless, religiously suspect, or economically unsupported. Objects that could be recycled usually were. Metal rarely survives unless the sea takes it first. The Antikythera mechanism survived because it drowned. It was not preserved by history, it was preserved by accident, and that should disturb us. Because if one ancient computer survived only because it sank in a shipwreck, how many others were melted, looted, broken, or lost? How much mechanical knowledge existed in the ancient world that left no trace because bronze was valuable and paper was fragile? The mechanism does not prove that ancient people had modern technology. It proves something stranger and more tragic. They had a branch of technology that history failed to carry forward. A real machine, a real tradition, a real sophistication, then silence. From the machine at the bottom of the sea, we move to the most examined structure on Earth, where a hidden space waited above the heads of every explorer, every priest, every caliph, every tourist, and every scholar for 45 centuries. 9. The Great Pyramid's hidden void. The room history missed. The Great Pyramid of Khufu has been measured, mapped, entered, drilled, scanned, argued over, worshipped, vandalized, restored, photographed, and explained more than almost any ancient structure on Earth. For centuries, people thought they knew its interior, the descending passage, the ascending passage, the Queen's Chamber, the King's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, the relieving chambers, the shafts, the known spaces, the official diagrams, the familiar cross-section printed in books and museum panels. Then, in 2017, subatomic particles proved the diagrams were incomplete. The Scan Pyramids project used muon radiography, a technique that tracks cosmic ray particles passing through stone, to detect density differences inside the pyramid. The result was not a small crack or a minor cavity. It was a large void above the Grand Gallery, with a minimum length of around 30 meters. 30 meters of unknown space inside the most famous monument in the ancient world. A sealed space. A space not entered. A space not described in ancient texts. A space not predicted by the standard architectural plan. The discovery was published in Nature. 3 independent muon detection systems produced consistent results. The void exists. Its exact shape and purpose remain unknown. Mainstream Egyptology offers a cautious explanation. The void may be structural. It may function as a relieving space, helping distribute the enormous weight of stone above the Grand Gallery. Ancient Egyptian builders clearly understood that internal spaces could manage stress. The known relieving chambers above the King's Chamber prove this. This explanation is possible, but possible is not the same as complete. The known relieving chambers have a clear structural relationship to the King's Chamber. They are rough, functional spaces directly above a major chamber. The newly detected void is larger, differently positioned, and still not physically explored. If it is structural, it represents a feature of the pyramid's engineering that no previous surveyor, historian, or architectural model had identified, and that alone changes the story. Because the Great Pyramid is not a forgotten ruin in a jungle, it is not an obscure cave system beneath a village. It is the centerpiece of one of the most studied archaeological landscapes in the world. If a 30-meter void could remain hidden there until the 21st century, what confidence should we have that other ancient monuments are fully understood? The discovery does not require fantasy. It requires humility. The pyramid still contains unknown architecture, and the builders knew it was there. They built around it. They sealed it within the mass. They left no obvious access route. They created a structure whose interior plan was more complex than thousands of years of investigation could recover. Whether the void is a chamber, a corridor, a relieving space, or something else entirely, one fact remains. History missed it. Not for a decade, not for a century, for 45 centuries. And if history can miss a space that large inside the most famous stone building on Earth, then perhaps the past is not hiding in distant places. Perhaps it is hiding inside the monuments we thought we already knew. From a void inside a pyramid, we move beneath the forest canopy of South America. where another kind of hidden architecture waited. Not inside stone, but beneath leaves, roots, and the assumptions of outsiders. 8. The Amazon cities revealed by LiDAR, the civilization under the forest. For generations, the Amazon was described as a green emptiness, vast, beautiful, hostile, and thinly populated. A place of tribes and villages, not cities. A place too wet, too dense, too ecologically difficult for large-scale urban civilization. That story was repeated so often that it became common sense. Then lasers flew over the forest. LiDAR, a remote sensing technology that can digitally strip away vegetation, revealed landscapes beneath the canopy that human eyes could not see from the ground. Roads, causeways, platforms, canals, settlements, geometric earthworks, urban patterns. Entire organized landscapes where earlier models expected scattered occupation. In the Bolivian Amazon, LiDAR surveys revealed pre-Hispanic low-density urbanism associated with the Casarabe culture, including large settlement centers connected by causeways and surrounded by infrastructure. Other research across Amazonia has identified thousands of earthworks and signs of extensive human modification. The forest was not empty. It had been misunderstood. The reason is partly ecological. Stone monuments survive in deserts. Amazonian architecture often used earth, wood, and organic materials that decay, erode, or vanish beneath vegetation. A city made of stone announces itself. A city made of earth can become a hill, a pattern, a rumor in the trees. But there is another reason. Outsiders arrived with expectations. They looked at the forest and saw a wilderness. They saw the present and assumed it represented the deep past. They underestimated indigenous populations because disease, violence, enslavement, and colonial disruption had already shattered many societies before systematic documentation began. By the time Europeans wrote descriptions, they may have been seeing the aftermath, not the height. Mainstream archaeology now increasingly accepts that parts of the Amazon supported complex, engineered, densely connected societies before European contact. This does not mean the entire Amazon was one giant city. It means the old binary, civilization here, wilderness there, was wrong. But the deeper question remains. If LiDAR had not revealed these structures, how long would the old story have survived? How many civilizations were erased not because no evidence existed, but because the evidence was made of materials that did not survive in ways outsiders respected? How many histories were dismissed as myth because the architecture had returned to soil? The Amazon discoveries force us to confront a brutal truth. History does not preserve all cultures equally. Stone cultures leave skeletons of themselves. Wood and earth cultures leave ghosts. And scholars trained to honor stone may overlook ghosts until technology teaches them how to see. The erasure here was not total. Indigenous knowledge, oral traditions, and local landscapes retained memory. But the global story did not listen. It preferred the myth of emptiness. Now the forest is answering. Roads beneath the trees, platforms beneath the roots, cities beneath the word wilderness. From the hidden urbanism of the Amazon, we move to central Turkey, where an entire population could vanish beneath the ground and close the doors from the inside. 7. Derinkuyu, the underground city built for a threat we cannot name. In 1963, a man renovating his home in Cappadocia knocked through a wall and found a tunnel. The tunnel led to another tunnel, then a room, then stairs, then another level, then another. Beneath the modern town of Derinkuyu was an underground city descending roughly 85 meters into the volcanic rock. Not a cave, not a basement, not a hiding hole. A city. Derinkuyu contained rooms, passages, ventilation shafts, storage spaces, stables, wells, churches, communal areas, and massive rolling stone doors that could seal passages from the inside. It was large enough to shelter thousands of people, with some estimates suggesting as many as 20,000 with livestock and supplies. The doors are among the most important details. They are not decorative. They are not symbolic. They are defensive engineering. Huge circular stones could be rolled into place from within the tunnels. Once sealed, they were difficult or impossible to open from the outside. Some had small central openings that could allow defenders to strike at intruders. A shelter keeps you out of the weather. Derinkuyu was built to keep something out. Mainstream history usually explains the underground cities of Cappadocia as refuge systems used by various populations across time, including Phrygians, later Christians, and communities escaping invasions or persecution. The soft volcanic tuff made excavation possible. The region's history of conflict made underground refuge practical. This explanation is reasonable. It explains use. But use is not the same as origin. Many ancient structures are reused by later peoples who did not build the first version. A Roman temple becomes a church. A pagan site becomes a mosque. A Bronze Age mound becomes a medieval fortress. Occupation layers can conceal beginnings. The problem with Derinkuyu is not that humans could carve it. They could. The problem is the scale of intention. Someone looked at the surface world and decided that a large community might need to live below it. Not for an hour, not for a night. Long enough to justify wells, air, animals, storage, and internal defense. What happened above ground to make that design feel necessary? Invasion is the standard answer, but the underground network feels larger than panic. It feels planned, expanded, inherited, and refined. It belongs to a landscape where going underground was not an emergency improvisation, but a civilizational strategy. And that strategy leaves a psychological trace. Imagine a society whose safest architecture is beneath its feet. Imagine children learning passages instead of streets. Imagine doors that only open from the inside. Imagine a world where survival means disappearing so completely that an enemy can stand above your city and see only ordinary ground. Derinkuyu is not proof of a lost supercivilization. It is proof of something more human and more frightening. There was a threat serious enough that entire communities engineered darkness as a solution. The threat may have been war. It may have been empire. It may have been persecution. It may have been a chain of dangers across centuries. But the first reason, the original fear, is not written on the walls. The city remains. The cause does not. That is one of the quietest forms of erasure. From a city carved to hide life, we move to China, where enormous artificial caverns were hidden beneath village ponds for perhaps 2,000 years, and the records of their construction vanished from one of the most record-keeping civilizations in history. 6. The Longyu Caves, the project no dynasty recorded. In 1992, villagers in Zhejiang province drained ponds that local people had long believed were unusually deep. When the water disappeared, the bottom did not reveal mud alone. It revealed openings. Beneath the ponds were vast man-made caverns. The Longyu Caves are carved into sandstone. Their walls, ceilings, pillars, and surfaces are covered in repeated chisel marks, often arranged in consistent parallel patterns. The chambers are large, deliberate, and engineered. Some rise to impressive heights. Together, the caverns represent an enormous removal of stone. And yet the historical record is silent. This is the part that matters. China is not a civilization known for careless record-keeping. Dynastic histories, local gazetters, administrative documents, construction records, poems, maps, and inscriptions preserve staggering amounts of information. Massive state projects often left traces in writing, memory, or bureaucracy. But the Longyu Caves appear with no clear ancient documentation explaining who built them, why they were built, how labor was organized, where the removed stone went, or what purpose the chambers served. Mainstream explanations include quarrying, storage, military use, ritual use, or some combination of functions. The caves may date to roughly 2,000 years ago, though precise dating is difficult because carved rock itself cannot be directly dated in the same way organic material can. Pottery, or sediment, can date use, not necessarily the first cut into stone. The quarry explanation is practical. People needed stone. They cut stone. The caves remained. But a quarry usually leaves a logic of extraction: ramps, tool debris, transport evidence, rough working areas, a visible relationship between removed material and construction elsewhere. Longyou gives us decorated emptiness. The repeated marks cover the surfaces so completely that the caverns feel less like leftover scars and more like finished interiors. If they were quarries, why finish them? If they were ceremonial spaces, why no inscriptions? If they were storage spaces, why such massive hidden excavation? If they were state projects, why no surviving record? The answer may be mundane. Records may have been lost. The builders may not have belonged to a literate administration. Later communities may have forgotten. The ponds may have sealed the memory so completely that the caverns passed from public knowledge into rumor. But that is precisely the point. A project requiring coordination, planning, labor, and engineering vanished from history so completely that modern villagers had to drain water to discover what was beneath their own landscape. The Longyou Caves are not just an architectural mystery. They are a warning about documentation. We assume large things leave large records, but sometimes they leave only space. A room without a name, a chamber without a builder, a million questions cut into stone. From the artificial caverns of China, we move back to Egypt, not to the pyramids, but beneath Saqqara, where a French archaeologist followed a buried avenue and found granite boxes so large and so precise that the official explanation still feels too small for the stone. 5. The Serapeum of Saqqara, the empty boxes beneath the desert. In 1851, Auguste Mariette uncovered the Serapeum of Saqqara, an underground complex associated with the burial of sacred Apis bulls worshipped at Memphis. The site was real. The cult was real. The inscriptions, stelae, and religious context were real. Then there were the boxes. Massive stone sarcophagi, some made from granite or other hard stones, placed in underground galleries. These were not ordinary coffins. They were enormous, weighing many tons, with lids so heavy that moving them required serious engineering. They sit inside chambers beneath the desert, dark, polished, silent. The official explanation identifies them as burial containers for the sacred Apis bulls, animals regarded as manifestations of divine power and entombed with ritual importance. This is the mainstream view, and it is supported by the broader context of the Serapeum. Sacred bulls were buried there. The cult is historically documented. But the boxes still create unease. Their scale is extreme. Their material is difficult. Their underground placement required planning. Their surfaces display a level of finish that has led some engineers and alternative researchers to argue that the workmanship exceeds what is normally imagined for the tools of the period. Mainstream Egyptology responds that ancient Egyptian artisans were entirely capable of extraordinary stonework using copper tools, dolerite pounders, abrasives, time, labor, and skill. This response should be taken seriously. Ancient Egyptian stoneworking was not primitive. It was masterful. But the question does not disappear. Why make the containers so massive? Why use such difficult stone? Why create objects that feel almost over-engineered for the burial of animals, even sacred animals? Why do some details seem to exceed the needs of funerary ritual? The deeper mystery of the Serapeum is not whether the Apis cult existed. It did. The deeper mystery is whether the cult explains everything found there. Ancient sites often accumulate meanings across time. A place can begin with one purpose and be absorbed into another. Later priests can inherit older structures. Older objects can be reinterpreted inside newer religious systems. A sacred landscape can be reused so successfully that its original meaning disappears beneath the later one. What if the Serapeum, as we see it, is both a bull burial complex and something older, something adapted, expanded, or recontextualized? This is not proven. But the possibility matters because it mirrors a pattern seen across the ancient world. Later cultures do not always destroy earlier mysteries. Sometimes they adopt them. They give them new gods, new names, new rituals. and in doing so preserved the stone while erasing the first explanation. The Serapeum is therefore not just a question of granite boxes. It is a question of historical layering. When a later story fits well enough, who keeps looking for the earlier one? The boxes remain in their galleries. The official label remains on the wall. But the stone itself still feels excessive, as if the object is larger than the explanation attached to it. From Egypt's underground galleries, we move across the Pacific to a city built on coral flats, where basalt logs weighing tons were stacked into artificial islands in the middle of the ocean. 4. Nan Madol, the city built where no city should be. Off the coast of Pohnpei, in Micronesia, lies Nan Madol, a ruined ceremonial center constructed on more than 100 artificial islets made from coral fill and walls of columnar basalt. The name is often translated as something like spaces between, referring to the canals that separate the islets. From above, Nan Madol looks like a stone city floating in shallow water. Walls, platforms, tombs, ceremonial spaces, and residences form a complex political and religious center associated with the Sotalur dynasty, flourishing roughly between 1200 and 1500 CE. That date makes it younger than some of the other discoveries on this list, but age is not the only measure of mystery. The mystery of Nan Madol is logistics. Columnar basalt is heavy. Some stones weigh several tons. They were transported and arranged in a location that required not only quarrying and movement, but coordination across water. The builders created a monumental center in a setting where the ocean itself becomes part of the architecture. Mainstream archaeology recognizes Nan Madol as a major ceremonial and political center of eastern Micronesia. It is not a fantasy city. It is not evidence of giants or aliens. It is the achievement of Pacific Island societies whose engineering abilities were underestimated by outsiders for far too long. But that sentence hides the wound, underestimated by outsiders. For centuries, many Western frameworks treated oceanic societies as isolated, simple, or technologically limited because they did not build in the same way as Egypt, Rome, or Mesopotamia. Yet Pacific navigators crossed impossible distances without modern instruments. Island societies engineered landscapes, managed resources, built political systems, and preserved knowledge through oral traditions that outsiders often failed to respect. Nan Madol forces a correction. It proves that monumental architecture does not require continents. It does not require wheels. It does not require writing in the form outsiders prefer. It requires knowledge suited to its world. Tides, reefs, stone sources, labor alliances, ritual authority, and marine movement. The erasure here was not that Nan Madol disappeared completely. Local memory preserved it. The ruins remained. The erasure was interpretive. The wider world did not know how to value what it was seeing. A city of stone in the Pacific should have shattered old assumptions about ancient seafaring and island engineering. Instead, it became a curiosity, a mystery often pushed into sensationalism because mainstream history had not given enough space to Pacific genius. That is one of the ways real history gets erased, not always by denying a place exists, sometimes by refusing to let it matter. Nan Madol stands in the water as a correction carved in basalt, a reminder that the map of civilization has always been larger than the old textbooks allowed. From the basalt city of Micronesia, we move to a small object from ancient Mesopotamia that became one of the most controversial artifacts ever discussed in connection with lost technology. 3. The Baghdad Battery. The jar that may not be a battery, and why that matters. In the 1930s near Baghdad, archaeologists found a set of objects that would later become famous under a provocative name, the Baghdad Battery. The basic artifact is simple: a ceramic jar, a copper cylinder, an iron rod, bitumen sealing elements in place. It dates broadly to the Parthian or Sasanian period, roughly 2,000 years ago, though details of context and interpretation remain debated. Wilhelm Koenig, associated with the Iraq Museum, suggested that the object might have functioned as a galvanic cell, perhaps used for electroplating or another electrochemical purpose. Later experiments showed that replicas could produce small voltages when filled with acidic liquids such as vinegar or lemon juice. This made the artifact famous. Ancient electricity, a battery before Volta. Technology erased from history. Mainstream archaeologists and historians are skeptical, and their skepticism is justified. There is no clear evidence of wires, no confirmed ancient electroplating industry in the region, no unambiguous electrical context, and alternative explanations exist. The jar may have been used to store scrolls, ritual materials, or protective texts. The word battery may say more about modern imagination than ancient intention, but dismissing the object too quickly creates another problem. Because the real question is not simply, was this definitely a battery? The real question is, how do we recognize ancient technology when it does not fit the categories we expect? If an object has no surviving manual, no matching workshop, no clear residue, and no written explanation, interpretation becomes fragile. A modern observer sees a jar, an engineer sees electrodes, an archaeologist sees context, a skeptic sees media exaggeration, a believer sees forbidden knowledge. The artifact becomes a mirror, and that mirror reveals how easily history can be narrowed by assumption. If ancient people discovered electrochemical effects accidentally, would they have described them in the language of electricity? No, they might have described taste, tingling, color change, metal transformation, medicine, ritual power, or craft secrecy. A real phenomenon could exist without being conceptualized in modern scientific terms. That does not prove the Baghdad battery was used as a battery. It proves that the absence of modern categories in ancient texts does not always equal the absence of observed phenomena. History often preserves the object, but loses the operating knowledge. A tool without its technique becomes a puzzle. A device without its tradition becomes a curiosity. A technology without its language becomes invisible. The Baghdad battery may be misnamed. It may be misunderstood. It may be far less sensational than its reputation, but it remains important because it asks a dangerous question. How many ancient objects are sitting in museum drawers under the wrong name? How many ritual objects were also instruments? How many ornaments were also devices? How many technologies became unrecognizable because the knowledge system around them died? The jar does not need to prove ancient electricity to prove historical fragility. It only needs to show how much depends on interpretation. From a disputed jar in Mesopotamia, we move to a map made in 1513 that preserved pieces of geographic knowledge from sources now lost. 2. The Piri Reis map. The map made from vanished maps. In 1929, a fragment of a world map was rediscovered in the Topkapi Palace Library in Istanbul. It had been compiled in 1513 by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis. The surviving portion shows parts of Europe, North Africa, the Atlantic, and the eastern coast of South America. It is a Portolan-style chart, rich with notes and illustrations, created at a time when European knowledge of the Americas was still new, unstable, and politically valuable. The map became famous partly because of exaggerated claims. Some argued that it showed Antarctica before its discovery, or knowledge impossible for its time. Those claims are not accepted by mainstream scholarship. The southern landmass is generally understood within the context of early 16th century cartographic conventions and distortions, not as proof of Ice Age global mapping. But the real mystery of the Piri Reis map does not require Antarctica. The real mystery is source loss. Piri Reis himself wrote that he compiled his map from multiple sources, including older charts and maps associated with Portuguese, Arab, Indian, and possibly Columbus-related geographic knowledge. The surviving fragment may preserve details from maps that no longer exist. That is the key. The Piri Reis map is not impossible because it shows the whole world perfectly. It is important because it is a visible remnant of an invisible archive. Maps are among the most politically sensitive objects in history. They guide ships, define claims, reveal trade routes, expose coastlines, and convert knowledge into power. Empires guarded them. Pilots stole them. Courts hid them. Libraries lost them. Wars destroyed them. Many maps were used until they fell apart, copied imperfectly, or vanished into private collections. What survived in 1929 may be only a fragment of a much larger cartographic memory. Mainstream history places the Piri Reis map in the vibrant world of early modern navigation, Ottoman maritime intelligence, and the rapid circulation of geographic knowledge after Columbus. That is correct. But again, the official explanation contains the deeper mystery. Circulation from where? Copied from what? How many source maps disappeared? How much indigenous geographic knowledge entered European or Ottoman charts without credit, without preservation of the original makers, without names attached? The map does not prove an advanced Ice Age civilization mapped the planet. It proves something more historically grounded, and perhaps more important. Discovery is often a false word. Many places were known by the people who lived there. Many coastlines were mapped by sailors whose maps did not survive. Many official firsts are simply the first surviving record in the archive of the powerful. The Piri Reis map is a wound in the archive. It shows that what we call history is often not the full record of what humans knew. It is the surviving record of what institutions kept. And when the source maps vanish, the surviving copy becomes both evidence and ghost. From a map made of lost maps, we move to the final discovery. Not a monument, not a city, not a machine, but an entire kind of human that vanished from the story of who we are until a fragment of bone and a cave in Siberia forced history to make room. 1. Denisova Cave, the people erased from the human family. For most of modern history, the human story was told as a narrowing line. Primitive ancestors. Then Neanderthals as a side branch. Then Homo sapiens rising, replacing, advancing, inheriting the Earth. Then a small fragment from Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains changed the family tree. In 2010, genetic analysis of a tiny finger bone revealed a previously unknown group of archaic humans now called Denisovans. Not a myth. Not a legend. Not a speculative missing race. A real population known first not from a complete skeleton, not from a city, not from tools with inscriptions, but from DNA. Think about what that means. An entire human group existed across deep time, interbred with ancestors of living people, contributed genetic material still present in modern populations, and yet remained almost completely invisible archaeologically until molecular science detected them. They were not erased from history by a censor. They were erased by preservation. Bone dissolves, caves collapse, landscapes change. Small populations leave faint traces. Later, humans occupy the same places. Tools may not identify species clearly. Without DNA, the Denisovans might have remained ghosts forever. And Denisova Cave contained more than genetics. It also yielded evidence of sophisticated symbolic and material culture in the broader archaeological context, including ornaments and worked materials that have generated debate about which human group made what. The cave was not a simple shelter. It was a crossroads of humankinds, Neanderthals, Denisovans, modern humans, and hybrids moving through the same ancient landscape. Mainstream science has incorporated the Denisovans into human evolution, but the emotional shock has not fully reached public history. We did not know an entire kind of human existed, not in some remote mythic age beyond science, in the actual genetic ancestry of living people. This is perhaps the most profound erasure on the list because it concerns not what humans built, but what humans were. If DNA from one small bone could reveal a missing population, how many other human stories remain undetected because the right cave has not been sampled, the right tooth has not survived, the right sediment has not been analyzed? The Denisovans prove that the human past is not a completed chart. It is an active excavation in which whole branches can still appear. They also challenge the arrogance of simplicity. Human evolution was not a clean replacement story. It was braided, interwoven, regional, violent, intimate, adaptive, and complex. Different human groups met, mixed, vanished, and survived inside us. The erasure was not total. It entered the blood. That is why Denisova Cave belongs at the top of this list, because it reveals the deepest kind of hidden history, the kind carried silently by living bodies before science learns how to read it. Final conclusion. History is not what happened. History is what survived 12 discoveries. A buried temple, a Neolithic network, a drowned computer, a hidden pyramid void, Amazonian cities beneath the forest, an underground city beneath Cappadocia, artificial caves without records, granite boxes beneath Saqqara, a basalt city in the Pacific, a disputed electrochemical jar, a map made from vanished maps, a lost human population recovered from DNA. They are not the same kind of evidence. Some are monuments, some are artifacts, some are landscapes, some are documents, some are genetic signatures, some are mainstream discoveries now accepted by universities and museums. Others remain disputed, controversial, or easily abused by people who want mystery more than truth. But together they point toward one conclusion that is difficult to avoid. The past is not complete, not even close. The old story of history as a steady climb from simplicity to complexity is broken. It was always too neat, too confident, too convenient. Real history is not a straight road. It is a ruined city under a forest, a machine at the bottom of the sea, a chamber inside a pyramid, a cave sealed by water, a human species hidden in a finger bone, a map copied from sources that no longer exist. History is not only made by what happened, history is made by what survived the fire. And survival is unfair. Stone survives better than wood. Deserts preserve better than jungles. Empires preserve their own records and erase the records of those they conquer. Metal is melted, paper burns, oral traditions are dismissed until technology proves they were pointing toward something real. Sacred sites are renamed. Older monuments are absorbed into newer religions. Tools lose their techniques. Machines lose their makers. People vanish from the story until their DNA reappears in the living. So when someone says, if this were real, we would have evidence. Remember the Antikythera mechanism. We had evidence because a ship sank. When someone says, if a civilization had existed in the Amazon, we would have seen it. Remember LiDAR peeling back the trees. When someone says, the Great Pyramid has already been fully explored, remember the 30-meter void found by cosmic particles. When someone says, the human family tree is basically known, remember Denisova Cave. And when someone says, ancient people could not have done that, be careful. That sentence has failed many times before. The real lesson is not that every mystery proves a conspiracy. It does not. The real lesson is that certainty is often the enemy of discovery. The past does not owe us simplicity. It does not owe us a clean timeline. It does not owe us explanations that fit inside the categories we inherited. Maybe someone erased parts of our real history. Maybe many people did. Conquerors, priests, colonizers, bureaucrats, looters, archivists, scholars with narrow models, collectors with private vaults, empires with reasons to forget what came before them. And maybe the greatest eraser was time itself. But erasure is not always permanent. Stone comes back. Forests open. Caves are scanned. DNA is sequenced. Maps are rediscovered. Machines rise from shipwrecks. A farmer drains a pond. A man knocks through a basement wall. A particle passes through a pyramid and tells us there is still darkness inside. That is why these discoveries matter. They are not just ancient objects. They are warnings against arrogance. They remind us that the official version of the past is not the past itself. It is only the current arrangement of surviving evidence. And the evidence keeps changing. If you are still here, it means you already understand something most people never will. The most important questions in history are not always the ones with answers. Sometimes they are the ones that refuse to die. Which of these 12 discoveries do you think changes the story the most? Which one feels like the loose thread that, if pulled hard enough, could unravel the entire official timeline? Leave your answer below. And subscribe, because history is not finished with us. The ground is still closed over most of it. The archives are still incomplete, the caves are still dark, And somewhere beneath stone, water, jungle, sand, or bone, the next missing chapter is waiting to be found.